Well, good morning. Hope your day is off to a good start. You know, today is Easter Sunday, and if you're in a home with kids, then finding Easter eggs is probably on your agenda at this moment. Today is also one of the most important days of the year on the Christian calendar. This morning, we're going to talk about Easter with someone who is very familiar to TV6 viewers. Starts right now.
From TV6, this is The Ryan Report. Here's your host, Don Ryan.
Well, our guest this morning grew up in Wisconsin and first moved to Upper Michigan to work as a radio announcer at WJPD in Ishpeming. She eventually moved to TV6, where she was an anchor on the morning news for 16 years. She left television at the end of last June to begin a new career, answering the call to serve as a pastor in the Methodist Church. We remember her by her TV name, Vicki Crystal, and she returns today as Pastor Vicki Pruitt. Vicki, welcome back to the Ryan Report.
Thank you very much, Don. Thank you.
For those people who aren't familiar, tell us exactly what you're doing now.
Well, what I'm doing right now is I am serving two communities in Iron County. I am serving the United Methodist Church at Crystal Falls as well as Amasa Grace. So two new communities for me to get to know people in.
We'll talk in more detail about that. You know, have you adjusted from having to stay up most of the night and sleep during the day?
For the most part, it's interesting. You know, the time change. How come that hits everybody, right?
Right.
But I'm still getting up in the morning at an earlier time than what most people would say is normal, but at least it's not midnight anymore. It did take a little bit of getting used to, and I have to admit that some days I sit there and go, 9:30 sounds like a fine time to go to bed.
Sounds like you're gradually transitioning.
It is a gradual.
You know, speaking of Easter, what was Easter like for you as you were a kid growing up?
You know what was interesting is when I was a kid, we didn't do a whole lot. We would have baskets and we would have candy in there and jelly beans. Everybody'd throw the black ones at each other because nobody liked the black licorice. Right. I loved it. We would make eggs the week before or the day before. We would make the Easter eggs and we would have Easter egg fights. About middle school, beginning of high school, things changed a little bit because that's when I got my first big present, an Andy Gibb album, the very first one. It was like, oh, I was so excited. Easter changed a little bit then. And as I grew older and started working and walking more in my faith, I came to realize that Easter had a deep importance in my life. And so it's always a change, you know, when you hit Easter.
Did you have the church tradition when you were a kid? I know you did at Christmas.
Yeah, we did. And, you know, we would go on Easter Sunday and then come home and have a big celebration at the house, have our ham and things like that. But it was a little bit different. It wasn't quite as overwhelming. Christmas seems to come and it's there forever and ever and ever. And when we do Easter, you have such a time of preparation first that you're pulling back so much that Easter is like the kapow moment, and then you get into the joy of the rest of the year.
So let's talk about now. You're living in Crystal Falls?
I am living in Crystal Falls.
Are you enjoying that?
I really and truly am. It's funny, everybody goes, well, it's not a big town like Marquette. I said, but Crystal Falls, the Amasa area, they have everything I need. So that makes it good, and it's starting to feel more and more like home.
Have you done some exploring to get more familiar with those? I know you've been in the UP for a long time.
So. Well, and you know I'm a waterfaller, so of course I had to, you know, last fall before the winter hit, I did finally get a chance to go check out Pierce Gorge, which is in that area. Love going to Bond Falls all the time, as well as some of the other smaller waterfalls that are in the region. Have done some kayaking, enjoying the lakes and stuff like that. It's been very good to be able to see a new area. Each area of the UP is so unique in itself, so it's been nice to learn more about the history of that area because I hadn't explored it before.
I think both Amasa and Crystal Falls have some museums. Have you had a chance to visit there?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, the Iron County History Museum is just an amazing place. They have big celebrations there all the time, and I was completely blown away by how awesome. That's a major museum they have there. And I did go to the Amasa Museum to check out the history of the town there. It's funny, a lot of people aren't familiar with Amasa. It used to be a big booming town.
Well, I'm not sure it was ever big. But
well, but it was booming. Yeah. So it's interesting to dig back and look at the history of the towns.
They are interesting little towns that are kind of fun to visit. Have you become more familiar with the Humongous Fungus?
Oh my goodness, right? What a fun time the Humongous Fungus Festival is. It really and truly is a fun time. And I love how what other people might have looked upon as, oh, we've got this giant fungus growing underneath our town, Crystal Falls just embraced it and said, yes, let's celebrate the giant mushroom. It's great.
And checking out some of your Facebook posts, I see you've also discovered a place called the Curious Pig.
I do, I really and truly enjoy, the smoked meats, and they are an incredible place. It's nice to see that in some of the ranks they've been moving up, and a lot of people have been talking about that. All of the places. I haven't had a bad place to eat yet.
Okay.
That's kind of nice.
And I know there are several choices over in that area.
There are.
You've always been a very happy person. Are you enjoying your new life as a pastor?
I am enjoying my new life as a pastor. Even though the pace is so very different from what I'm used to, I've learned things in my life that have sort of prepared me for it, and I've learned that if you hit a time when things start to slow down, don't feel you need to fill that with something. Enjoy the slow times, because that's your time to recharge. That's your time to talk to God a little bit about, what the next step is. It shouldn't always be a mad dash. You should be able to slow down and take a breath and say, okay, let's just stop and reflect a little bit. I think that's probably one of the biggest changes in my life is I've been learning how to slow down and reflect a little bit.
I think I have to take that advice, because I think about those times myself, and when I'm sitting quietly, I think it must be something I'm supposed to do.
I know, and I think that our society has sort of taught us that. Be busy, be busy, be busy. Being busy is fine, but when you're just doing make work to keep yourself busy, I think you lose some of the reflective time, the time where you get the chance to stop and think about what's really happening and why you're doing what you're doing. And it sort of robs us of our joy. I don't want to be robbed of my joy anymore.
Got a lot more questions for you. We'll get to those in just a couple of minutes. Back with more on the Ryan Report after we take this break. Again, we're talking with Pastor Vicki Pruitt, and you have two churches. Does that present some challenges for you?
Not really challenges. What's kind of neat is makes Sunday very busy. I go to Amasa Grace for an 8:30 worship service in the morning, and then I get to Crystal Falls, and I'm there for 10:30 in the morning, both in Central Time. And it's busy, but there's enough time in between where I can still be able to talk with the people in between times. Each church has different gifts that they bring to the table, and I really enjoy that. That's nice.
Oftentimes, I was going to ask, are there any things that surprised you as you've gotten into this new assignment? Unexpected?
Not yet. I know that there are things that I was given a lot of good guidance along the way when I started this journey, and they tried to prepare me for a lot of the different things that I would approach. So I haven't hit anything that's really surprised me. Sometimes there are things where they'll pop up and I say, ugh, am I able to handle that situation? And then I just sit and I talk to God and realize that I'm not really in charge, and I just have to let it, flow in its natural course of life. So
one thing that maybe people don't think about is the fact that a pastor has to kind of be a general manager of a church too, and handle the business end of it. I know you have church councils and boards that help out, but how is that part of it going?
It's been interesting because, that's a different kind of responsibility. It's more than just being, a manager. It's a very different feeling knowing that, you have a responsibility to take care of all sorts of different things. So I've been learning as I go, but I've been very blessed that I've had people in both of the churches that have been there long enough that they understand that aspect of it, and they can guide me on things. So that's a good thing.
That's good.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Easter.
Okay.
This is, well, let me ask you.
Sure.
Is this or Christmas the biggest day in the Easter Christian faith?
Well, let me put it to you this way. If you looked just from the outside world, the secular world, there is no doubt that Christmas is overwhelming. It's such a joyful, happy time. We have mixed feelings about Easter because it all starts with the joy of Palm Sunday because it was such a happy occasion. Like I said, we're walking out of Lent, which is a very time of where you do a lot of introspection and deep talks with yourself. And so then you hit Palm Sunday with the joy, and then you hit Maundy, Thursday, where you start to realize that the weekend, that memory of that time of what happened is coming. The different emotions we hit with Good Friday. Right. It's Easter is an emotional roller coaster. That's what it is, and not everybody likes emotional roller coasters. You hit Good Friday, there's sadness, there's anger, there's guilt, there's all sort of things mixed in there. And if you were reliving that time, you're thinking, how do I overcome all of these emotions that hit? And then you get to wait. You're waiting and waiting, and you're thinking it's never going to change. And then Sunday morning rolls around, and then you're hit with overwhelming joy and happiness and love. I mean, you're up and down on your emotions.
I'm certain. What's the message you're going to share with your members of your church on this Sunday?
Well, I've been thinking about it, and I haven't completely written it yet, but the thing that I really like about Easter is I love how God bookends things and how it all started in a garden and a broken promise to God and fear in the Garden of Eden once that first fruit is eaten. And then in another garden where sins are forgiven and redemption is found and there is hope for the future. Oh, I love how those two gardens are a reflection of each other and how we've brought to the lowest lows and the highest highs in between those two times. That's kind of the feeling I'm going for.
And certainly for Christians, the birth of Jesus was very important.
Absolutely.
But his death and resurrection and what that means for Christians certainly has to be.
And that's the real message. It's a spiritual thing. And I know that there are people probably watching who have doubts, they don't believe. You know what? That's okay. God still believes in them and still has a course for them and is still waiting to forgive them when they ask for it. And I think that's the thing. It's available for everybody. You think you got to jump through all these hoops, and really all you have to do is have faith and believe. And it's an amazing thing because on the end, it's really easy, but yet not.
Okay. We'll talk more about that in just a minute. Back with more after we take one more break. Once again, our guest this morning is Pastor Vicki Pruitt. Before we leave the subject of Easter, in a sense, we're really in the middle of the Easter celebration, aren't we? It does extend beyond Easter.
It does. It goes all the way up until Passover. So we've got that time of joy that, we can get in there and then talk about the rest of the work of the church. So we're getting ready in very exciting time.
I think the Bible says Jesus was on earth for about 40 days after his resurrection.
Yep, and then he gave us the Great Commissions to go and make disciples of all nations, and so it's good.
I think, and as someone who worked in media as I have, the thing to me that is most amazing, and whether you're a Christian or not,
right,
is the impact that he had that was so sustaining for so many years. I don't know that we know for certain, but I think he was only in his ministry for about 3 years, perhaps.
That's what my understanding is. I'm still a student and learning a lot, but that's about 3 years, and he was only in his 30s. He was a relatively young man according to our standards, and so the impact of such a young person and just following what he knew his path was.
Right.
And it makes me think of these young people out there who have a path and they're thinking, oh, I'm never going to get there. You might be surprised how quickly you changed the world just by your life, because that's what he did. By his life, he changed the world. And I think there are a lot of people out there that can have big impact, but he's hard to top.
Yeah. And you know, and he was really in a very small area, and there was no cable news channels back in those days. So.
Not really, and considering so much until the Bible was actually printed, it was all word of mouth. Right. People just spreading word of mouth, and it's amazing. It absolutely is amazing how a good message, normally it's always the bad message you hear that gets spread around, right. And this was such a good message.
You know, you're starting your new career, and I was thinking about the fact that a lot of people who go into the ministry do it right out of high school,
sure.
right out of college. You had some other experiences first. Do you think that helps you as a pastor?
I think what it helps me with is, while I have a lot to learn yet about the book learning of everything, I think what it helps me understand is it helps me understand people, and really helps me understand that sometimes life isn't as cut and dried as you want it to be. Sometimes we can get so, we put our blinders on and think, well, it's just one way. And the world is so diverse and so complex that sometimes the answers aren't cut and dried, and they're not always easy to find. And so I think that helps me understand people a little bit more, especially, you know, all of the different stories having been in the media. I understand that it can be rough.
You've seen really every side of life.
Oh my goodness, right? Yes, just about.
On a positive side, I think your daughter was recently married.
She was, yeah. She got married at the end of February. She and her husband had asked if they could get married at the Amasa Grace Church, and it was beautiful. It's such an iconic, the epitome of the little country church, and it was just beautiful. Of course, there was a blizzard, but you know, that's life.
And so now you're hoping to become a grandma someday.
Someday, when they're ready, and I always told them there's no pressure on that. That's your decision to make, and what you decide, I will live with. But I'm hoping.
You become a pastor at a time when the Christian church is losing some of its followers.
It is.
Do you think you can help reverse that trend?
You know, I have no big dreams of myself. What I want to do is just work in the communities where God has placed me. And whether it's the church attendance or just simply one by one, letting people know their personal worth. I just want to make a difference one person at a time. And I find if you make a difference one person at a time, that ripple effect is much larger than you realize. What happens in the future, we're in a small area, and all I want to do is just help my area to grow spiritually the best that they can.
And speaking of that ripple effect, and we have only a minute left.
Yeah.
As you know, Carl Pellenpah has been TV6 has established the Carl Pellenpah Lifetime Achievement Award, and I think that's a great tribute to Carl, and I'm sure you agree.
Absolutely. Well, first off, congratulations for being the first recipient, but yeah, Carl was such an incredible person. He also walked on faith and, was willing to take chances and do new things, always found joy in what he was doing. And what a wonderful way to remember a truly wonderful person.
But he was also a fun guy, wasn't he?
Oh my goodness. I don't know a single person who couldn't tell a funny story about Carl. Right. He always had them.
And he loved to scare people occasionally.
Oh my goodness, yes indeed. He really enjoyed to make me jump because he'd come in the early morning hours when I was here by myself sometimes, and yeah, there's sometimes.
Well, it's so good to hear that you're doing well, and nice to share those memories with us.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Don.
Okay, I'll be back with some other thoughts for you in just a couple of minutes. Well, today we talked about Easter and the meaning this holiday has in the Christian faith. But like Christmas, the other major Christian holiday, Easter has come to mean more to Christians and non-Christians alike. Like Christmas, it's difficult to see the link between the actual meaning of the holiday and the other traditions that have grown up around it. Major case in point would be the Easter Bunny. How did he become part of this holiday tradition? According to one source, the Easter Bunny, once known as the Easter Hare, did originate among German Lutherans, and like Santa Claus at Christmas, played a role in judging whether kids had been good or bad at the start of the Easter season. Personally, I'm not sure I want a rabbit judging our behavior, but I guess it worked for them. I don't think that aspect of the Easter Bunny's role continues today, at least not in this country. After all, the Easter Bunny also brings candy, which really isn't good for any of us. Of course, all things in moderation. Then there's the matter of Easter eggs. What possible connection could they have with the true meaning of Easter? It's easy to jump to the conclusion that these are all fairly modern customs that don't really relate to the Christian beliefs at this season. But a little internet research revealed that the opposite could be true. Eggs were often associated with pagan festivals and celebrations of spring, but it was also common for eggs to be decorated and given as gifts to friends and family. But the symbolism of rebirth also fits well with the celebration of Jesus' resurrection. The practice of decorating eggs and giving them as gifts was adopted by 15th century Christians and included in their Easter celebrations. A couple of other Easter traditions we can consider: the Easter parade. The idea never went well in Upper Michigan because marching in a parade on a snow-covered street never sounded very exciting. The idea really goes back to New York City in the mid-1800s, when the upper crust of society would attend Easter services at various churches and then stroll outside afterwards showing off their new spring outfits. The whole idea really became part of our culture in 1948 when the popular film Easter Parade was released, starring Fred Astaire and Judy Garland and featuring the music of Irving Berlin. The title song in the movie is called Easter Parade and makes reference to people parading in their Easter finery. The song also gave birth to the idea of the Easter bonnet. Once again, not particularly part of the Yooper culture. After all, when we heard these words from the classic song in the movie, "In your Easter bonnet with all the frills upon it, you'll be the grandest lady in the Easter parade." Certainly when Irving Berlin wrote those words, he wasn't thinking of a Stormy Kromer with the ear flaps pulled down, which is what we might see on an Easter Sunday in Upper Michigan. We always hope for better, but you just never know what to expect. I'll be back in a minute. Before we wrap it up for another week, let me remind you again that you can also catch our show on the internet at uppermichigansource.com. Today's show will be available starting tomorrow afternoon. Thanks to our former TV6 colleague, now Pastor Vicki Pruitt, for sharing this Easter Sunday morning with us. And thank you for being here. Make sure you check around your house carefully so you don't miss anything the Easter Bunny might have brought you and your kids. And we'll see you next Sunday morning.